At 28,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, death came quietly. No explosions, no warning sirens. Just cold, so intense it froze oxygen masks to men's faces and turned lubricating oil into sludge. For the crews of the B-29 Superfortress, January 1945 was not a month of victory. It was a month of attrition. On the morning of January 27, 1945, 62 B-29 bombers lifted off from Isley Field on Saipan, bound for Tokyo. Each aircraft carried 11 men. Each crew had been trained for months. Each bomber cost more than $600,000, an astronomical sum at the time. The mission was routine on paper, a daylight, high-altitude precision strike against port and industrial facilities in the Tokyo area. But the men who flew these missions knew better. By early 1945, the air war over Japan had reached a brutal turning point. The B-29 Superfortress was the most advanced bomber ever built. Pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets. A bomb sight so precise, it was said to drop a bomb into a pickle barrel. American planners believed it would operate beyond the reach of Japanese defenses. At 30,000 feet, they said, fighters could not climb fast enough. Anti-aircraft guns could not reach high enough. The bomber would fly above the war itself. Reality arrived over Japan in blood and fire. Since November 1944, the 73rd Bombardment Wing had been flying from the Marianas. Mission after mission followed the same deadly pattern. Long climbs through violent jet stream winds, temperatures plunging to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, bombers struggling to hold formation as winds of 150 miles per hour shoved them sideways, bombardiers fighting to stabilize their northern sights, and every single time Japanese fighters were already climbing to meet them. By mid-January, the cost was undeniable. 31 B-29s lost, more than 300 airmen gone. The worst losses came on January 14, 1945, over Nagoya. 5 superfortresses were shot down in less than 20 minutes. Crews who survived described fighters attacking head-on, closing at over 400 miles per hour, firing cannons until the last second, then pulling away through the bomber stream. Some never pulled away at all. American tank crews in Europe had learned painful lessons from German Panthers and Tigers. In the Pacific, B-29 crews were learning something equally sobering. Altitude was no longer protection. One aircraft symbolized this shift more than any other. The Nakajima Ki-44, known to American intelligence as Tojo, was never meant to be elegant. It was fast, brutally simple, and built to climb. Japanese pilots called it Shoki, a name drawn from folklore meaning devil queller. The translation was fitting. Powered by a Nakajima Ha-109 radial engine, the Ki-44 could reach 28,000 feet in under 8 minutes, fast enough to intercept the B-29s before they stabilized on their bomb runs. Armed with heavy 12.7mm machine guns or 20mm cannons, it was deadly at altitude, where American gunners struggled with frozen mechanisms, oxygen deprivation, and reduced reaction time. Worse still, Japanese pilots had begun adopting a tactic born not from fanaticism, but calculation. Starting in August 1944, select interceptor units began practicing deliberate ramming attacks against B-29s. This was not kamikaze doctrine. These pilots were expected to return, if they survived the collision. But if ammunition was expended and the bomber remained airborne, the math was simple. One fighter for one bomber was an acceptable exchange. A B-29 carried 11 men. A Ki-44 carried 1. One of the units specializing in this tactic was the 47th Sentai, based at Narimasu Airfield, just north of Tokyo. American intelligence reports, declassified decades later, credited the unit with at least 3 confirmed B-29 kills by ramming, and several more bombers damaged so badly they crashed, landed, or were written off. These facts were known to the crews, at least in outline. At hour 400 hours, the men of the 497th Bombardment Group gathered for their briefing. Weather reconnaissance reported clear skies over the primary target. That meant visual bombing. Visual bombing meant holding a straight level course for minutes at a time, an eternity under fighter attack. The intelligence officer did not sugarcoat the odds. Of the 62 bombers scheduled for the mission, 9 were not expected to return. Among the crews listening that morning was the youngest gunner in the group, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, age 22. He had flown 11 combat missions over Japan. He had fired his guns before, twice over Nagoya, once along the Japanese coast. He had never seen a fighter fall. Chen manned the central fire control station, the technological heart of the B-29's defensive system. From that cramped compartment, he could control 4 remote turrets mounted across the aircraft's fuselage. The system was revolutionary, an analog computer calculating lead, airspeed, and deflection in real time. It was also temperamental, especially in extreme cold. By late morning, the bomber stream crossed the Japanese coastline. At 11:58 a.m., radar operators on Honshu picked them up. Air raid sirens began to wail across Tokyo. At Narimasu, pilots were already running toward fighters warming on the flight line. At exactly 12 noon, the first Ki-44s lifted off. 43 interceptors turned southeast, climbing hard into the thin winter air. Above them, one B-29, call sign a square 52, continued steadily toward Tokyo, unaware that within minutes it would face more enemy fighters than any superfortress had encountered on a single mission. And far above Japan, in air cold enough to kill a man in minutes, the deadliest altitude war of the Pacific was about to begin. The first fighter appeared as a dark speck against the pale winter sky. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen saw it through his optical sight at extreme range, more than 12,000 yards out, climbing almost vertically through scattered clouds. At first it looked unreal, a black dot rising straight up toward the bomber stream. Then wings became visible. Then, the blunt radial engine calling. There was no mistaking it now. A Ki-44. The fighter rolled inverted at approximately 27,000 feet and tipped its nose down toward the lead elements of the formation. 3 more followed close behind. Their timing was perfect. The Japanese pilots had climbed beneath the bombers, used the cloud layers for concealment, and now dove with gravity and speed on their side. Chen rotated the upper forward turret, his gloved hands steady despite the cold. The guns he controlled were mounted 15 feet away from his position, linked by electrical and hydraulic systems that fed into the B-29's analog fire control computer. Airspeed, altitude, slip angle, all of it was being calculated automatically. On paper, it was the most advanced defensive system in the world. At minus 50 degrees, it was barely holding together. The lead Ki-44 opened fire at around 800 yards. Tracers arced upward, thin red lines reaching toward the bomber stream. Chen waited for the firing solution to settle, then pressed the trigger. The turret came alive, twin 50 caliber machine guns hammering at 2,800 feet per second. The fighter snap-rolled left and vanished beneath the formation. No hits, too fast, too disciplined. By 12:07 p.m., the sky was full of attackers. Ki-44s came in from every quadrant, high side passes from 11 o'clock, diving through the formation at nearly 400 miles per hour, then braking hard left or right to escape concentrated fire. This was textbook interceptor doctrine, refined through months of combat. Most pilots did not press their attacks to point-blank range. They fired, broke away, climbed, and came again. Then came the rammers. The aircraft commander of a square 52 called out a fighter at 2 o'clock high. Chen swung the turret and picked it up instantly. The Ki-44 was not diving steeply. It was lining up for a beam attack. Wings level, nose tracking the bomber with deliberate precision. Range 700 yards. Chen led the target and fired a 3-second burst. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds walked across the fighter's flight path. The Ki-44's engine exploded in a sudden bloom of black smoke and flame. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell away, trailing fire. First confirmed kill, Chen did not react. There was no time. 2 more fighters were already maneuvering into position. The right blister gunner engaged one attacker with his twin 50s. The tail gunner called out another closing from 6 o'clock low. Chen slaved the lower aft turret to his sight picture and fired. He missed. The tail gunner took over, stitching rounds across the fighter's wing route. Aluminum skin peeled away. The Ki-44 shuddered, entered a flat spin, and dropped out of sight. Second kill credited to a square 52. At 12:19, the formation reached the initial point for the bomb run. This was the most dangerous moment of any daylight bombing mission. For the next 6 minutes, the bombers would fly straight and level while bombardiers synchronized their northern bomb sights. Course changes were forbidden. Evasive maneuvers were impossible. The Japanese pilots knew it. 14 Ki-44s formed up 3,000 feet above the bomber stream. They orbited once, then again, organizing themselves into coordinated attack elements. Chen counted them through his sight as they rolled in, pairs diving simultaneously from 10 o'clock high and 2 o'clock high, forcing gunners to split their fire. The first pair opened up at 1,000 yards. Chen engaged the lead fighter. his tracers converged with fire from two other B-29s. The Ki-44 flew straight into the combined stream. Its canopy shattered. The aircraft snap-rolled right and collided with its wingman. Both disintegrated in midair. Third and fourth kills, but the second pair had used the chaos as cover. They were now inside 500 yards, cannons firing. Chen could see the muzzle flashes. He tracked the nearest fighter. It was not breaking off. It was not jinking. The pilot had committed. Impact in 4 seconds. Chen fired continuously. Hits sparkled across the fighter's engine cowling. Smoke poured out, but the Ki-44 kept coming. The range closed. 300 yards, 200, 100. At 12:22 p.m., the fighter struck engine number 3 on a square 52. The sound was like a steel hammer smashing into a boiler. The Ki-44's propeller tore through the engine cowling before disintegrating. The bomber yawed violently as the propeller ripped free and tumbled into space. The fighter's wing sheared off. The fuselage cartwheeled over the B-29's back and vanished below. Warning lights flooded the cockpit. Engine 3 on fire. Engine 4 losing oil pressure. The aircraft commander shut both right side engines down and activated the fire suppression system. A square 52 dropped out of formation, losing altitude at 300 feet per minute. Alone. Damaged. A perfect target. 3 Ki-44s broke from their attack patterns and dove toward the crippled bomber. Standard doctrine dictated that damaged bombers were to be finished quickly, before they could jettison bombs and gain maneuverability. Chen rotated the turret to meet the first attacker, diving from 1 o'clock high. He waited, forcing himself to let the targeting computer stabilize. At 600 yards he fired. The burst caught the fighter squarely. The canopy exploded. The Ki-44 rolled left and went down trailing debris. 5th kill. The second attacker came in from 5 o'clock level. The tail gunner fired for 6 seconds before his guns fell silent, ammunition exhausted. Chen slaved the lower turret, fighting sluggish hydraulics, and fired a short burst. The round struck the fighter's wing root. Structural failure followed instantly. The aircraft broke apart at 12,000 feet. 6th kill. But the third fighter had used the engagement as a diversion. It was now at 3 o'clock high, less than 300 yards out, wings level, nose pointed directly at the cockpit. Its guns were silent. Second ramming attack. The right blister gunner fired. The fighter did not deviate. Chen swung the turret hard right, hit the mechanical stops, and fired again. Hit stitched across the fuselage. The Ki-44 shuddered, but held course. At 50 yards it struck engine number 1. The propeller disintegrated. Shrapnel ripped through the wing. Fuel sprayed into the slipstream. The fighter broke in half, its tail tumbling over the flight deck, while the engine section tore a 6-foot hole in the leading edge of the wing. A square 52 now had one functioning engine. Altitude fell through 18,000 feet. Airspeed dropped below 160 miles per hour. The wing leaked fuel. Hydraulics were failing, and above them, 12 more Japanese fighters were already forming up for the next wave. The battle over Tokyo was not over. It was only entering its most desperate phase. The temperature inside the gun stations dropped even further as the square 52 fell through 16,000 feet. With the pressurization system compromised and the aircraft riddled with holes, the cold poured in unchecked. Frost crept across metal surfaces. Ice crystals formed on wiring, ammunition belts, and the glass of the optical sights. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen could feel his fingers growing numb inside electrically heated gloves that were no longer receiving stable power. The bomber was now flying on a single engine. That engine, number 2, a Wright R-3350 radial, was never meant to keep 32 tons of damaged aircraft airborne by itself. The asymmetrical thrust twisted the airframe constantly. The jammed rudder fought every attempt at control. The left wing, torn open by cannon fire and ramming impact, produced massive drag. Below them was Japan. Above them, the enemy regrouped. The 12 Ki-44s split cleanly into 3 four-ship elements, a classic wolfpack formation used specifically against crippled bombers. One group climbed high to feint, one dropped low to draw fire. The third held back, waiting to exploit whichever defensive gap opened first. Against an intact B-29, the tactic was dangerous. Against a wounded one, it was usually fatal. Chen wiped ice from his sight with a gloved thumb and tracked the first group as they dove from 12 o'clock high. He fired at 900 yards. The upper turret responded sluggishly. Hydraulic pressure had fallen below 30%. The recoil shook the entire mount. Tracers arced upward. The lead Ki-44 jinked right, then left. Chen corrected and fired again. The burst caught the fighter's wing. Fabric and aluminum peeled away. The wing folded. The aircraft snap-rolled and vanished into the cloud layer below. 7th kill. The remaining 3 attackers pressed in simultaneously. Cannon rounds slammed into the bomber from multiple angles. Plexiglass in the bombardier's compartment shattered. A 20mm shell detonated inside the nose, killing the bombardier instantly. Frigid air screamed through the opening. Chen did not look away. The fire control computer failed completely as hydraulic pressure collapsed. No more automatic lead, no more compensation. Everything now depended on instinct and experience. He aimed manually, leading the next fighter based on speed, angle, and memory. The burst struck low, tearing through the fighter's belly. Smoke poured from the engine as it broke off trailing debris. Probable kill. The 4th fighter dove almost vertically, closing fast. Chen fired a long burst. Tracers walked directly into the engine cowling. The propeller stopped. The Ki-44 dropped nose first and disappeared into the clouds. 8th confirmed kill. But the price was becoming unbearable. The left horizontal stabilizer was shredded. Control cables snapped. The bomber yawed violently. The aircraft commander fought the controls, reducing power on the single engine just enough to prevent a spin. The airspeed bled away, 140 miles per hour. Too slow, dangerously close to stall. The tail gunner saved them. As another Ki-44 attempted a beam attack from 9 o'clock, the tail gunner fired a short burst with his mechanically operated guns, one of the few systems still unaffected by hydraulic failure. Rounds struck the fighter's tail. The rudder separated. The aircraft entered an uncontrolled flat spin. 9th kill. The second wave was already inbound. Altitude 14,000 feet and falling. Airspeed 140 miles per hour. Ammunition almost gone. Chen checked his counter. 15 rounds remaining in the upper turret. The blister gunners were nearly dry. The tail gunner had perhaps a minute of fire left. 4 more Ki-44s split into 2 pairs. Combat experience had taught Japanese pilots that even crippled B-29s could still kill. Coordinated attacks remained the safest option. The first pair dove from 2 o'clock high. Chen tracked the lad fighter and waited until 700 yards. He fired every remaining round in a single sustained burst. The tracers converged on the engine. Metal fragments flew. The propeller disintegrated. The fighter rolled, inverted, and fell away trailing smoke. 10th kill. The turret fell silent. Empty. Chen abandoned the central station and crawled through the narrow connecting tunnel toward the rear of the aircraft. The right blister gunner was wounded, shrapnel embedded in his shoulder. Chen took his position as the next fighter closed. No computer, no hydraulics, just muscle and timing. The Ki-44 opened fire at 400 yards. Cannon rounds punched through the wing. Chen led the target and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into his shoulders. The burst caught the cockpit. The canopy shattered, the fighter snap-rolled and fell away spinning. 11th kill. The last pair attacked from 4 o'clock level, firing continuously. One aimed for the cockpit, the other targeted the wing, root, and fuel tanks. The tail gunner expended his final ammunition, walking tracers into the lead fighter's windscreen. The aircraft pulled up sharply and vanished into cloud, later confirmed destroyed. 12th kill. The final fighter pressed in alone. Chen could not engage. His position could not traverse far enough forward. The left blister gunner fired his last 30 rounds. They struck the wing root. Fuel sprayed into the slipstream. The Ki-44 banked hard to escape. The damaged wing failed at the spar. It separated cleanly. 13th kill. Silence followed. A Square 52 was now at 12,000 feet, still descending, with no defensive ammunition left anywhere on board. The aircraft had shot down 13 fighters. It no longer had the means to stop a single one. Then the final 4 appeared. They did not dive. They did not maneuver. They formed a straight line behind the bomber. Chen understood immediately. This was not another attack wave. This was a calculation. 4 fighters. 4 deliberate ramming attempts. Japanese pilots knew their fuel state. The Ki-44's combat radius was limited, barely 200 miles at high power. They had been airborne nearly 40 minutes. They had perhaps 10 minutes left. 10 minutes was enough. The lead fighter accelerated, building speed for impact. Chen braced himself against the blister frame. There were no guns left. No options. The aircraft commander tried gentle evasive maneuvers, but the jammed rudder made sharp movements impossible. At half a mile, the unexpected happened. Black smoke poured from the Ki-44's engine. Not from gunfire, from failure. The Nakajima Ha-109 radial seized under sustained combat power. Cylinder head temperature spiked beyond the limits. The propeller stopped. Without thrust, the fighter lost speed and altitude, slipping below the bomber's tail. The pilot attempted a restart, failed. The ramming attack aborted by mechanical failure. 14th kill. The remaining 3 fighters broke off. Fuel state was critical. They turned northwest toward Narimas and disappeared. The sky was suddenly empty. A Square 52 had survived, but survival at 12,000 feet over enemy territory, on one engine, with 2 dead and several wounded, was only the beginning of the hardest part of the mission, getting home. When the last Japanese fighters disappeared into the winter haze, there was no celebration aboard a Square 52. There was only damage. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen crawled forward through the narrow tunnel toward the flight deck, helping the flight engineer assess what little remained of the bomber. The list grew longer with every inspection. Engine number 1 destroyed by ramming. Engine number 3 destroyed by ramming. Engine number 4 shut down due to oil pressure failure. Only engine number 2 remained operational, running at the very edge of its limits. The bomber had dropped below 12,000 feet. Fuel was leaking from ruptured tanks. Hydraulic pressure hovered near 15%, barely enough to move control surfaces at all. The rudder was jammed hard left. The bombardier was dead. The right blister gunner was critically wounded. One life raft had been shredded by cannon fire. The radio compass was damaged. Navigation was now partly visual, partly dead reckoning. Distance to Saipan, 1,512 miles. Estimated flight time at current speed, 11 hours. Fuel remaining, 9 hours at best. The numbers did not work. The flight engineer proposed a desperate solution. Restart engine number 4. It had not been destroyed, only shut down after oil pressure dropped following the first ramming attack. Running it without adequate lubrication would destroy it within half an hour. But the 30 minutes of additional thrust might increase airspeed just enough to reduce overall fuel consumption and extend the range. The aircraft commander approved the restart. At 13:52, engine 4 coughed, sputtered, and caught. It ran rough, vibrating through the airframe, but it produced thrust. Airspeed increased to 170 miles per hour. The rate of descent slowed. The bomber leveled off at 10,000 feet. A Square 52 was alone. The main bomber stream had continued to Tokyo. Bombs were dropped. Photographs were taken. The mission was officially successful. Somewhere over Japan, men were already turning south for home. 4 engines running, tight formation, escorting one another through the long flight back. A Square 52 had no escort. Chen moved the wounded blister gunner away from the freezing fuselage skin and applied pressure bandages. The morphine syrettes in the first aid kit were frozen solid. Pain relief was impossible. The gunner remained conscious, drifting in and out, losing blood slowly in the sub-zero air. At 14:20, engine 4 failed exactly 28 minutes after restart. Cylinder head temperatures exceeded tolerance. Internal components seized. The propeller windmilled briefly, then stopped. The aircraft commander feathered it to reduce drag. Back to one engine. Altitude began to fall again. The navigator recalculated. Distance to Saipan, 900 miles. Fuel remaining, 7 hours. Still impossible. The flight engineer ordered the auxiliary bomb bay fuel tanks jettisoned. Empty but heavy. 400 pounds of useless weight dropped into the Pacific. The aircraft gained barely 100 feet. At 15 the navigator identified a potential alternative, Iwo Jima. The island was still in Japanese hands, but American submarines occasionally surfaced nearby to rescue downed aircrews. If they could ditch successfully offshore, there was a chance, slim but real. The aircraft commander rejected the plan. B-29 ditching survival rates were under 40% under ideal conditions. With wing damage and a jammed rudder, the bomber would likely break apart on impact. They would try for Saipan. Electrical systems were shut down one by one to reduce load on the generators driven by the lone engine. Interior lighting, heating elements, navigation instruments. The temperature inside the aircraft dropped to minus 40 degrees. Frost formed on clothing and skin. Breathing was shallow to conserve oxygen. At 17:30, another formation of B-29s passed overhead at 18,000 feet, returning from Tokyo in tight formation. 4 engines running, airspeed 270 miles per hour. They would reach Saipan in 4 hours. A Square 52 was making 160 miles per hour at 8,000 feet. Fuel exhaustion was predicted in 4 hours and 50 minutes. The wounded gunner lost consciousness at 18. Chen monitored him constantly, checking breathing, pulse, doing what little he could. At 24 hours, the gunner stopped breathing. Resuscitation failed. Time of death was called. His body was left in place. Moving him served no purpose. The single engine continued running. At 1845, cylinder head temperatures entered the red zone. Oil pressure fluctuated. The Wright R-3350 had already been operating beyond its rated continuous limits for hours. The flight engineer reduced power slightly to preserve it. Airspeed dropped to 150 miles per hour. At 21 say, navigation lights appeared off the right wing, a US Navy destroyer on patrol. Confirmation they were still on course. Confirmation they were not yet close enough. Fuel gauges showed 30 minutes remaining at 21:45. Distance to Saipan, 120 miles. The gap was closing, but not fast enough. All remaining fuel was cross-fed to engine number 2. Every valve opened, every drop routed forward. At 22 SAR, runway lights at Isley Field came into view. Distance 8 miles, altitude 4,000 feet. Fuel gauges nearly empty. The landing gear would not extend. Hydraulic failure. The flight engineer cranked the emergency hand system. The nose gear deployed. The left main gear deployed. The right main gear, damaged earlier, remained retracted. 3 miles from the runway, the engine coughed. Fuel starvation. It restarted briefly, then quit. The propeller stopped. A Square 52 became a glider. The bomber crossed the runway threshold at 300 feet. Too high, too fast. It touched down halfway down the runway at 110 miles per hour. The left main gear collapsed instantly. The aircraft slewed sideways. The left wing struck the runway. Metal screamed. Sparks lit the night. The bomber skidded 500 feet and came to rest in the dirt. 10 men escaped through the rear hatch. 2 did not come home. A Square 52 was declared a total loss, but the record remained. 14 Japanese fighters destroyed in a single mission. 1 bomber, 1 crew. The highest confirmed total ever achieved by a B-29 in the Pacific War. There were no medals that night, no photographers, no headlines, just exhausted men standing on a dark runway, alive. And because they survived, their story survives too.